think Zach Edey is been the most interesting, or one of the most interesting conversations, in the draft world, and in how you view him, whether you're a believer, whether you're a non-believer. But Zach Edey is a center out of Purdue. He is listed at 7'4", 300 pounds. He will be 22.1 years old on draft night. This season, he's putting up 31.3 minutes per game, 24.4 points per game, 11.7 rebounds per game, 2.1 assists per game to 2.2 turnovers, 0.2 steals, 2.2 blocks, shooting 61.9% from the field. He's at 50% from three, Albert, on 2 attempts on the season, but 71.6% from the free throw line on 11.2 attempts per game. He has a true shooting percentage of 65.9, an effective field goal percentage of 62, a PER of 38.9, and a BPM of 16.2. Not bad. Not bad. Preseason, Edey's stock price was lower than it is now. ESPN had him at 47 coming into the preseason. No ceilings did not have him ranked. Bleacher Report had him at 57. Yahoo did not have him ranked. The Athletic had him at 38. And Tankathon had him at 43. He was the 43rd ranked prospect on the Draft Deck IPO with an average price of 48.5. Currently, ESPN has him at a high of 15. No Ceilings has him at 26th. Bleacher Report, 32. The Ringer at 23. The Athletic at 21. Tankathon at 37. Average stock price of 25.7. So, Albert, I ask you, at 25.7, is Zach Edey's stock price too high, too low, or is it just right?
I think it's just about right. And Corey, I will say, I've been saying that a lot recently. So I apologize for not being more hot takey for our listeners out there, but it feels just about right. That the range in the 20s, not a crazy number for him. On my personal board, I have him at 24, right? So just right around there in the 20s. And we're gonna get into the scout with Edey, but he's a gigantic human being, as we've said. Today is our Kane and Undertaker pod. I'm not the wrestling guy, so I apologize for trying. No, I'm really excited. Not bad. Okay. Because also, like, Edey kind of reminds me of Kane. Like, his eyes look kind of soulless sometimes. I hope that's not offensive to him. But no, with Edey though, like, his game, I mean, he's been so ridiculously productive in college. Would not be crazy at all to say he's been the most productive player in college basketball this season. Just an unbelievable force for Purdue, a number 1 seeded Purdue, to add as well. And and as you mentioned, 50% from 3, which the one make was in a blowout off the backboard. So, but excited to talk about him.
Yeah, I agree. I think his stock is close to right. I think for a team to take him like towards the lottery would be a bit much. Although with that said, I do think that if you were to tell me like, hey, Zach Edey is going to be one of the 14 best players to come out of this draft, I'd be like, yeah, probably. But I guess it depends like at what point you believe the upside swings are worth taking over the more sure things, right? But I think 25 in that range is just about right. I have him at 26 on my personal board. So 25.7 is right on the money for me. And, I'm interested to talk about him with you because I've seen him twice now over the last few years. The first time I saw him was the Jaden Ivey year. So, you had Jaden Ivey, you had Trevion Williams, and, the teams would play through them a lot. So not to say that he wasn't featured back then, right? But like, those guys, they were running a lot of stuff through them. And then, I saw him earlier this year against Rutgers, and he had a huge game. And, I got to the arena 2 hours early and, watched him warm up and move around and, all the stuff he was doing pregame. And, I've always been impressed by Edey. and seeing him in person, there's something to it, because you don't realize how massive 7'4", 300 pounds is. You mentioned like Kane and the Undertaker, who, they're typically listed as like 7-footers in the world of WWE, and they're probably not close. So when you see somebody who is like legitimately just an absolute monster, giant person, it's a little bit breathtaking. And then seeing how that guy moves, because, you like to always take it back to the 90s guys. He just moves differently than George Muresan moved, like, you know what I mean? Like, so he's definitely an interesting conversation to be had. So, with that said, where should we start with the Edey conversation?
Let's start on offense. Obviously, shooting is not really an option here, but we can do
50%.
Big picture. We can do big umbrella offense here.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, look, he's averaging 24.5 points per game, right? 62% shooting. And then he's getting to the free throw line 11.5 times per game. Like, that is kind of wild. Like, how difficult it has been for teams to stop him from getting efficient looks, and then him still, cleaning the offensive glass and going back up, or having to send doubles, and, him going through these guys, and just how massive he is and difficult he is to move off his spots. And then you just have to foul him. And then the fact that you can't hack a shack him and he's making over 70% of his free throw attempts, I think it's an undersold aspect of his offensive game. I know we normally start with shooting, but him being a guy who generates free throws at this rate is not something that I think should be undersold, because he's still going to be 7'4", 300 in the league. He's still going to be a tough physical guy to handle, and you might have a few defenders in the league who can match up with him somewhat physically, but mostly you can't. So I still think that's something that's going to translate and be a weapon for him, when he makes it to the league.
Yeah. No, Corey, I've loved everything that you said. I was always excited to have the Edey conversation with you, just because you've seen him in person more than once. And I think when it comes to Edey, everything that you said, I think is spot on. But also, Corey, like, for his size, he's really well proportioned. Like, he doesn't look like he's too like weird with any part of his body. It all looks very proportional. He's very coordinated for his size. If we're talking offense, he catches everything. Everything. And
Good
he doesn't
hands.
always get great hands. Other than like Braden Smith, like the passing to him hasn't always been the best, but he catches everything. Doesn't matter, high, low, behind, not matter. He catches it. Good touch. And Corey, like, he's had big usage for a long time. Even that Ivy year you're talking about, he was at 34.4% usage rate that year. Like, that was, and with the guys that he was playing with, and that number's actually slightly even gone down the last 2 seasons, right? But he's just an absolute monster of a human being, hard to contain. I don't remember if it was him playing against Indiana or Wisconsin, one of the red teams. But he, like, first possession of the game, like 4 guys were in his vicinity, just all 4. They're like, we want to do whatever we can to stop you. He got fouled, banked it in, no problem, right? And so I know it's anywhere you read Edey description on the internet, almost all of it is ground bound, not mobile. I've seen the word loafing around used, and I'm just like, I couldn't disagree more, because of everything that you said, Corey, and with what you see on film. Of course, he's not fast. I would never hop on a mic here, Corey, and be like, yeah, I think Zach Edey is name any fast center, right? Like, I don't think he's that at all, or super athletic, or, but he's coordinated. And to be 7'4" and coordinated, to be that strong, to have spent the last 3 years in college with the usage rate that he's had, and to still be this productive and scoring at the rate that he's at, and getting to the line even more, as you said. And Corey, on top of that, he's also worked on his body, to his credit. He's a guy who's really toned his body and is continuing to get better. He also has Team Canada experience, right, from playing with them recently. I think there's It's easy to be like, he's slow. I think the more wired breakdown for him is that there's a lot more to him, and he deserves more credit considering what he's doing. Although he's 7'4", is my opinion right now.
Yeah, and I don't think that he's slow. Like, I think he's actually pretty nimble, like in a straight line.
Yeah.
You know, like if he's just straight up running to the rim or he's getting back on defense, like he's pretty nimble. Like he's light on his feet and he's pretty quick in a straight line. Like obviously some of the side to side stuff, which we'll get into later, or like the reload stuff like that, is maybe not the quickest, for a big guy. But yeah, I think he moves really well, and seeing it in person is jarring, man. Like it's jarring because you're like, oh, he just moves like a normal guy when you're watching from 5 feet away. But yeah, he's got great touch. Like he's a force around the paint, right? Like he's pretty like quick off his feet. Like you said, he's got soft hands, good catch radius. And he's really good in pick and roll. Like he is somebody that I think, is going to also be like a vertical lob threat. Maybe not like the type of guy that you traditionally think is going to be a lob threat, like a Derek Lively, who's like super bouncy, but like he's huge and he's long and he's got great hands. So like if you throw it up, he'll get it. And like you said, like I think one of the differences, when we break down Klingon versus Edey, Klingon's got like 1,000 guys who can throw him the ball where he needs to get it.
Yes.
Although when I saw him last week, UConn probably left like 8 points in the first game on the table because they just kept overthrowing every alley-oop to no matter who it was to. But I digress. But like I think Braden Smith he rocks. Like that dude can hoop. But like you said, like that's the guy there, So he doesn't have a ton of options. I think in the pick and roll with NBA guys, I mean, when he hits somebody, you're going to feel it. He's super strong. His momentum is really hard to stop when he is moving forward. He's really good at sealing. Now, like, I think when if you were to like look at his play types, right, you're like, oh, he's like mostly featured as a post guy. And I still think that he will be getting post up opportunities. But like the NBA, if you have watched or listened to the JJ Redick and LeBron podcast, which came out literally like 6 hours ago. So whatever, so if you haven't yet, you should watch it. They talk about like the big difference from when they started entering the league to now is how much more of a game of chess basketball is. And you're just trying to identify where the mismatch is on the floor, right? So with Edey, I still think he's going to get post touches when teams do switch him at, a ball screen. And now all of a sudden he's got a smaller guy on him. They'll dump it down to him when he ducks in, off the ball when he makes cuts, and, his defender loses him because he's paying attention to, the guy. Like they'll find opportunities to give him the ball off mismatches where he can utilize his ability to score in the post. It may not be your traditional 1990s type shit, but like he's still going to get the ball on the block and go to work there, and he's going to be a load to handle there. So, let's go to the chat for a second. Mr. Jones, Boban is a coordinated 7'4", 300-pound guy. That's kind of where I see Edey. I don't know if his ceiling is much higher than that. I think the thing with Edey that's so impressive is like he's playing over 30 minutes per game this year. And like I don't think he will do that in the league, but the fact that he can play so many minutes, I think bodes well for him, being a guy that has the potential to play more minutes than you would expect him to. So I think that he has potential to be used similarly to Boban, where he comes in and Boban just has these dominant stretches, right? Like where he's super effective. But I think Edey actually moves a little bit better defensively, and is able to hang a little bit more and has, a stamina that sets him apart. And shout out to everybody in the chat. If you are watching live, make sure that you, like, subscribe, share, all the good stuff. Shout out to Mr. Ray. Shout out to Norin Rad. We got La Patience, Estune, Virtue, probably jack that up. But shout out to everybody. So, look, we've got a Luca Garza shout out. We got a Boban shout out. We're going to get a bunch of guys like that. And, I think there's a big difference between a lot of these guys and Zach Edey. I think Zach Edey, we've talked about before. I think he has some outlier traits.
Yeah. And if I can, Corey, just piggybacking off of what Mr. Ray wrote in the chat, right? Like, I think that's really important, where for him, look at what the NBA is becoming since the All-Star break. And the NBA wanted to deny, and yet now it's coming out that they really have, instructed their refs to kind of swallow the whistle. And if you listen to the Zach Lowe pod last week when he had Joe Dumars on and Monty McCuffin, they're talking about, like, there have been some changes a little bit in the way that they're calling these games. And you look at a team like the Knicks right now, right? Last 30th in the league in pace, right? But also first in the league in defensive rating. And they're playing really slow and they're holding teams to under 100 points. And they've kind of found like a nice loophole in this new way of, that they're calling the games, is that they're slowing things down. They're playing really physical and they're adjusting to that. Right. And I think a guy like Zach Edey, you bring him off the bench and you have him play 18 to 22 minutes per game, and he comes in and he gives you that type of size, a guy who all throughout his college career was hit and smashed and attacked and scratched from all over the place, has dealt with double and triple teams throughout his time in college. You bring him off your bench to be a guy to come in and do what you're talking about, right? Like exploiting mismatches, set good screens, be active on the offensive boards. He's going to be an absolute menace when it comes to tip-ins and tip-outs, right? Something that Tyson Chandler made very popular in the early 2010s, right? I think Edey will be able to do a lot of that as well. And once again, in this draft, and you grab Zach Edey in the mid-20s, that's not you grabbing him to be your starting center from day one. This you can say whatever you want. This isn't the strongest draft we've ever had. It's absolutely not. But if you can get a really solid energy big, a guy who you can use in mismatches, a guy who can offer this type of, not normal size, grabbing him at 25 doesn't feel like a stretch for me at all. And once again, if the NBA is going to continue to trend in this way as they have in the last, 13, 15 games so far, of wanting to embrace more contact and not making everything so advantageous to the offensive player, having a giant bruiser like Zach Edey, who's coordinated and fluid as a mover as he is at his size, that's a really interesting proposition in my opinion.
Yeah, and again, I think using him, in these certain situations, and when we talk about the teams that'll best fit Edey, we can go into it a little more in depth. But I think he's going to be a kind of tool that not every team is going to be able to have in their toolbox. Now, Mr. Ray in the chat says that Edey's not much of a playmaker, and I tend to agree. I don't think he is. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a weakness, but it's certainly not a strength. And it probably would, if you're tipping the scales, it would probably lean slightly more weakness than strength. Because for somebody with his usage, right? Like, I mean, it's not that, he's a terrible passer. I mean, nearly 15% assist percentage is pretty good. And he's been hovering in, somewhere around there since his second season. And, his turnover percentage is only 10.8, but, negative assist to turnover ratio.
Right.
I think my thing that I've noticed watching him both on film and in person is that it feels like a lot of times he makes the kickouts like a split second too late. Like he holds the ball a split second too late and lets the guy who's doubling down or tripling down get a little bit too close. So now he's got to make a much more difficult pass kick out than he otherwise would have, where if he just processes things and starts reading and understanding where guys are going to be before they come and double down and what his options are, I think that's something that will benefit him going forward, because being able to operate not only is a guy who's going to be down on the block, and now you got to make a kick out, but also in the NBA, so many actions concerning the big or quick pitches and DHOs and being able to make a lot of different reads out of that, because now you're more up towards the perimeter. Guys think you're going to come off a DHO, and all of a sudden you got a cutter coming from the opposite corner, and you got to be able to make those reads. These are the type of things where like he's okay, and I think he'll be okay. But if he was like good at this, like if he was a good passer instead of just an okay passer, he's like a no-brainer top 5 guy, right? Like irregardless of how you feel. And I get a lot of stuff for saying irregardless sometimes. Kevin James just named his special after that, so Long Island legend. Also, go to the dictionary. Like, it's a word now. It just means regardless. But I think that if that was the case, like he'd be a much easier sell. So if that's an area that he can emphasize going forward, he might be more than a specialty guy.
Yeah. And Corey, everything you're mentioning, right? We see that in the NBA with some guys. Bam, incredible with that stuff. Obviously, Jokic. There are these bigs. Even like Lively this season has had spurts and flashes of having some impressive passing flashes. But with Edey, but also Corey, when I was watching Edey's tape, I did wonder if sometimes he was late with those passes, not necessarily because of processing, but also because of like he spent 4 years in college and is very cognizant of his physical advantage over guys. And sometimes he wants to be stubborn about just fighting through everything and finishing. Because the thing that you'll realize for our listeners out there, if you haven't done the deep dive on Edey yet, there's some edge to him. He's got a little fuck you to him. There are a couple of games where these like guys who are, clearly smaller than him, but they try to get physical with him and try to, muddy things up with him, and he'll kind of give him a look and be like, "The fuck are you doing? Like, I'm Zach Edey. You need to relax." And there is this edge to him that I do enjoy. And with what you're saying, Corey, I'm there with you. I would not make the argument that I think he's a good passer either. As you mentioned, I think he's got 69 assists, 68 assists to 74 turnovers is what you're talking about. And it's clearly not his strength, but once again, as like a small little defense to him, I think part of it is just he knows that he's so much bigger and stronger than a lot of these guys, and he's like, let me just kind of force my way through. Now on the next level, that advantage is not always going to be there. There are going to be bigger, stronger centers who are going to be ready for his size. Guys like a Gobert are going to be ready. Even like a Bam, like he's obviously much shorter than Edey, but Bam is so goddamn strong. There will be these NBA bigs that are going to give him a hard time. And so maybe that's something that he continues to work on. And, once he realizes he doesn't have the same advantage, maybe he is able to, make those quicker reads.
Yeah, I agree. That's going to be an interesting thing to watch him develop. Let's talk about his defense now. Because I think, this is kind of the big area where people are concerned about him and what it will look like in the NBA, because as we talked about earlier, where teams are looking to mismatch people, and Edey can take advantage of that on the offensive side of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, teams are going to look at Edey and try to find ways where they can bring him out to the perimeter and try to pull him away from the rim and try to get quicker guys and see how well he's able to, stick with them. Right. So where have you come off with his defense, watching him play?
I'm definitely not going to make some huge defense for his defense, because there were some moments, but then also I think some of it, okay, I'm saying a bunch of things without actually saying anything, but to give you an example, his last game against Wisconsin, right? First 3 or 4 possessions, Wisconsin, they understand the scout on Edey is if we run pick and roll, if we run pick and pop, most likely he's not going to come out to the shooter if we pass to the big. And that's exactly what they did. I think the first like 2 or 3 possessions, they ran pick and pop on the side. I think it was the right side, and they got their big to take a couple threes, just absolutely airballed them, or actually one of them, they're just 2 bad misses, right? And with Edey, it's like, a lot of times he's just not going to come out there to guard the pick and pop, and he's not the most agile mover, but he's 7'4", and I think, Corey, there are moments where he kind of rests on that a little bit, and he goes, well, I'm gigantic and I'm going to use my size and my length to block some shots. But I would be lying if I said I thought he was a really good defender. However, I think where he lacks in lateral mobility, where he lacks sometimes in, but also I go back and forth because there are also these moments where I'm talking to myself while watching his tape. I'm like, oh, what happened here? He's just kind of, standing around, not doing much. And also I'm looking at the other end of the floor where he just got manhandled by 4 different guys, just punching him and scratching him and stuff. So I'm trying my best not to defend him, but I think overall there is a lot of work to be done, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely work. I think his impact defensively is not what you would look for when you're like drafting Walker Kessler or potentially Donovan Clingan, right? Like there's a bit of a difference there. But I think he has some really impressive moments. And I think that people just look at him 7'4", 300. You think of Boban, you think of these guys, and you're like, he's a plotter. Like there are no defensive tools. And I think he's got moments where you're like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, I like that. And I think that you talked about like the pick and pop thing. He's also had some moments where he's looked great in the guarding the pick and pop. Because look, we could sit and talk about like, oh, how is he going to guard when he's in isolation against, Kyrie Irving and this and that. Teams are going to do whatever they can to make sure that doesn't happen. And he's going to try to sit in a drop as much as possible. Right. And teams will be, whoever drafts him will be prepared for when that guard gets him, sees him in the drop and tries to pull him back out. If the guard is too late recovering over the top of the screen, they'll try to pre-screen and pre-switch or whatever. Like they'll figure ways out around it. But like him guarding in a drop, if you watch some of the possessions, like in the Michigan State game, minute left, 3-point game, right? Edey's in the drop, gets low in his stance, which I think he's pretty good at. Like he's got good hip flexibility. He can get low. So he gets low in his stance, contains the dribble penetration until Smith can come back. And then he's able to close out to the perimeter on the pass out back to the pop and contest with his length. So I think what people don't realize with him too sometimes is like he's 7'4". He's got a 10.5 wingspan too.
Pretty good.
Like he has got crazy length as it is. So, he moves, I think he moves well and not just for his size. And that was in a clutch moment where he really had to dial it in, turn it up, make sure he was locked in. Few minutes before that, same game, another nice recovery, same situation, opposite side. So he's not perfect there, but I think he's been pretty good in those situations where he has to recover out to the shooter. Now, sometimes he can bury himself a little bit too far to where there's just no way to get back out and close out to the shooter in time, even with his length, because where he struggles with is like exploding on that first burst recovery. Like that's where he looks a little bit like a plotter. Like he doesn't have that quick, like you're running track and you hear the gun and all of a sudden you explode off. Like he doesn't have that. So I think he's going to have to be smart and be like, all right, this is a shooter that I can give a little bit more space. This is a guy who I have to step up a little bit higher on. And then sometimes when he's guarding ball screens, I think, and again, because he doesn't have that quick first step burst, like if he plays the guard too high and like if it's an empty side ball screen and that weak side help isn't at the rim, like it's left Purdue in a rough situation because he can't explode trailing the play to get back into it fast enough. So he's not perfect. He's not perfect at all, but I think he's going to be able to survive. And if he's not playing 30 minutes and not everything is running through him 100% of the time, maybe that extra effort that he does have, the extra energy, maybe it'll be enough where he can be a little bit better. Because even in isolation, and teams have not ISO'd him nearly as much as you think, just pulling him out on those switches. But even then, like, I think he's pretty good at getting low. And when he's able to shade his man to a side, and not play flags. When he plays flat, he's letting the guard dictate the action, and he can get himself in trouble. But when he actually decides to like force somebody to a side and he could slide with them,
Yeah.
I think he's really good at using his length, giving them enough cushion. And then by the time they get to the rim, now he has you where he wants you, and he can use his length to contest the shot. When I saw him against Rutgers, insane ISO defense against Derek Simpson, who's like a quick, shifty guard. And he just absolutely sent it into the stands. So his problem, it all comes to me is like that first step burst where it's like, all right, I stopped. Now I got to start again. Where like somebody hits him with a hezzy, I think he can be pretty prone to like, oh, now I'm late because I stopped my momentum and now I got to restart it again.
Yeah. I mean, but to be fair with what you're saying, Corey, he's 7'4" listed. He's probably going to be 300, right, when he's in the league. So we could forgive him for not having that explosion that you're talking about. And, you mentioned that Michigan State game. I do agree with you. There was this one possession where they ran pick and pop with Booker, and Booker, not a great outside shooter, but, Edey did a good job getting. Yeah. Booker did a good job getting out to him. Edey did a good job of getting out to Booker. So yeah. I'm with you on that. I think the stance stuff, sometimes it comes and goes. And to that, I do want to speak to what you said before about, minutes and usage and all that stuff. And the NBA, not only will he have less minutes, but definitely less usage as well, in my opinion. And so if that's the case, we could easily see the transition of his energy levels being higher on the defensive side, because Corey, you're right. He can get into a good stance, but sometimes he's just freaking exhausted. And when he is exhausted like that, it is hard for him to get into his stance, and it is hard for him to get out to the 3-point line sometimes. But all that's fair, and you kind of have to weigh all that together and realize that it won't be the exact same parameters when he's in the league. So I'm okay with that. Also, have to mention strong rebounder. Obviously, he's going to clean the glass and be a great part, not just on the offensive glass, but on defense as well. Clearing that and getting them going the other way. So I think with Edey, Corey, the ultimate point that I think we're both trying to make is he's not, as so to give you like the name you used before, Derek Lively, right? He's a different type of center than Derek Lively, but that doesn't mean that he's necessarily like the way that people are characterizing him as a defender. I think, in my opinion, Corey, sometimes can be really, really lazy. Like they just see 7'4", they see close to 300 pounds, and they go, "Oh, this guy has to be slow." But I don't think it's that simple. As we mentioned before, there is a fluidity to his movement pattern. There is, he is really, really proportionate, and I think that really helps him with how he moves and how he looks on the floor. And I think it's just sometimes really lazy analysis to just be like he's slow. I really, really don't think it's that simple. And Corey, if you really, as you mentioned, when you really turn on the tape and take a look, he's actually not that slow. And so once again, like if we're looking upwards and we're looking to the next level and how all this translates in a smaller role with less usage, I don't see why he can't be a pretty decent defender.
Yeah, I agree. And again, if he can be a rim deterrent, if he can be a guy who can, just make things difficult with his size and give guys a different look. And that's what you're asking him. He's not going to be Jahlil Okafor going top of the draft as an outdated type of player. And all of a sudden now you spend all this heavy draft capital on him. You're drafting this guy to play a specific role on the team. So with that said, what teams do you think would best fit Zach Edey onto their roster construction?
I think I saw somebody because I think it's Vicini, right, from The Athletic, and he posted a new mock draft today. Do I have that right, Corey?
I believe so, and I did.
And he had the Knicks taking Johnny for a fee at 19, and I think Edey at like 24. And I looked at that, and I was like, perfect. Why would that not work, right? The Knicks are literally last in pace in the league. We're 30th in the league in pace. I think since the All-Star break, the Knicks are like top 5, top 10 in net rating, number 1 in defensive rating. And a guy like Zach Edey coming off the bench rather than Jericho Sims makes me feel really good. Not to say that I hate Jericho Sims, right? But Jericho Sims really struggles to catch the ball, really struggles on the defensive boards, the boards in general, is super athletic, but a lot of times doesn't really know what he's doing, even after 3 seasons. And I think if you swap out just a 1-for-1, right? You swap out Jericho Sims, let him walk, and you add Zach Edey to that Knicks roster, or Knicks roster that's not looking to run, a Knicks roster that is used to having a interior post player like Julius Randle. I don't mind that at all, especially in that range, right? We've talked about his draft stock being around 24, 25. If the Knicks end up in that range and grab him to be their backup center, to go along with Mitchell Robinson, and maybe if they pay Hartenstein as like a third center, I think that would be a brilliant move by the Knicks front office, in my opinion, just because of what he can offer in a, as a third center role with the amount of minutes he'd get. And of course, as we've seen with both Hartenstein and Mitchell Robinson, the injury history that they have, adding a guy like Edey as insurance rather than having to play, Precious Achiuwa at the 5 and Jericho Sims, or re-signing Taj Gibson 12 times, I think that's a damn good option, in my opinion.
Did you see Mitch said he might be open to coming off the bench on Instagram?
I did see that.
Then he can cook.
And
he can get into his bag.
Some pull-up threes from Mitchell Robinson.
All that work he's doing in the offseason. All for naught. I think the Knicks would be an interesting fit. Larger than life guy in a larger than life city. I think that would be really fun. I think a team like Boston,
yes,
would be interesting. The 3 teams that I had were Boston, Phoenix, Miami. Phoenix, I think, Nurkic's having a great year. It's been phenomenal. Injury history, right? Let's get some depth there. Another team that plays kind of a slower pace, Miami, same thing. And then, the thing that all 3 of those teams have in common, outside of the fact that they're, playoff teams that believe that they're contenders, is that they're all going to, at some point, if they believe that they are a championship level team, have to go through a Joel Embiid, a Nikola Jokic, right? These guys who are in their way. And if you get a guy like Zach Edey, who's by no means going to be a Jokic stopper, an Embiid stopper, or anything like that, but is a guy who can at least match up with those guys physically, give them a little bit of a different look, and maybe, just make things a little bit harder. Nobody makes things hard for those guys. It's just, can you make it a little bit harder than it would typically be? And Edey is such a physically dominant force that maybe in that kind of role, those kind of teams would be really well equipped to do that. Like, you can't load up on Zach Edey if on the perimeter you have Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant and Devin Booker on the floor. Ton of spacing, can't double down because you're not leaving any of those guys, right? That's a situation where it could work. I think that, and again, what I said earlier about making him, allowing him to, kind of give some of the guys they have to go through a little bit of a work, and maybe he makes them work on the other end a little bit too. So I think those are the type of teams that should be targeting Edey.
Yeah.
Because I think he can bring a value that not every player can to those kind of teams.
Really quickly, Corey, before we move on, I just want to say I love your Phoenix call out, just because, look, this is the healthiest Nurkic has been in a long time. And also I want to say, like, if Yusuf Nurkic can get better at defense, then why can't Zach Edey, is my point. And also Phoenix could use another big coming off their bench rather than what they have right now. So I think that's a great shout. I think that'd be really interesting. Or even if, like, I don't know, if Toronto's interested and Toronto uses a pick later on and he gets to go play in Canada, that's always fun. Not really a basketball thing, but just fun.
Absolutely. All right. So before we move on, Albert, it's time for you to cook. I need you to sell me this pen on Purdue big man Zach Edey.
Okay, so this may be like an anthropological study, but I don't know how many human beings are out there on planet Earth that stand 7'4", that are as proportionate as Zach Edey and moves like he does at that size. I think NBA teams should be exploiting that advantage, just the advantage that he has over the rest of mankind, being the size that he is and the athleticism that he has and the touch that he has. If you're grabbing a guy like that, late 20s, early second round, you should be really excited because Zach Edey is an absolute beast who's been highly productive, both scoring, rebounding, all over the place in college. You should be interested in grabbing a guy like that in that range because you can bring him off the bench, have him play about 18, 22 minutes for you every single night, and he'll be productive in those minutes. You're not grabbing him to be your starting center per se. You're probably not grabbing him to be your number one option as he's been in college, but he's gigantic. He has great touch. He knows how to score the ball on the inside. And we think he's got more to offer defensively than he's shown in college because of the role that he's played. So if you're interested in all that, you should grab Zach Edey.